The most expensive thing a rich man can lose is not money, but the chance to recognize a truly good heart. Winter had wrapped the Castellano estate in a quiet blanket of silver frost, and luxury seemed to breathe from every polished stone, every glowing window, and every elegant pine tree decorated for the annual charity gala. Expensive cars lined the circular driveway while influential guests stepped onto the red carpet wearing tailored coats, sparkling jewelry, and confident smiles. Inside the grand mansion, crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across marble floors, creating an atmosphere where wealth felt as natural as the air itself. Adrian Castellano, the White Mafia boss whose calm authority could silence an entire room with nothing more than a glance, had just returned from a week of business meetings across the East Coast. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall in his perfectly tailored black suit, his dark brown slicked-back hair touched with natural silver, and his composed expression revealing nothing of his thoughts, he greeted investors and community leaders with effortless confidence. Beneath the open collar of his black dress shirt, the edge of his familiar black and gray tattoo rested against his chest, hidden from most eyes, yet impossible to separate from the legends surrounding his name. While conversations filled the ballroom and soft jazz floated through the air, Adrian quietly stepped toward the front entrance to enjoy a moment away from the crowd. That was when something completely unexpected caught his attention. Near the iron gates beyond the long stone pathway stood a homeless boy who could not have been older than 10. His shoes were worn beyond repair. His gloves did not match. His cheeks had turned red from the freezing December wind. Yet none of those details held Adrian's attention for more than a second. What stopped him completely was the coat wrapped around the child's shoulders. Adrian recognized it instantly. It was an Italian cashmere overcoat, custom-made in Milan, one of only 3 ever produced in that exact design. The deep charcoal fabric, the hand-stitched collar, and even the subtle silver buttons left no room for doubt. It belonged to him. The coat had disappeared from his private dressing room 2 days earlier. Every member of the household had insisted they had never seen it leave the estate. Security footage had shown nothing unusual. Adrian had dismissed the matter as a simple mistake, unwilling to accuse loyal employees without proof. But now the impossible stood only 50 feet away, shivering in the winter air. The young boy carefully adjusted the oversized coat around himself before kneeling beside a smaller little girl whose hands trembled from the cold. He gently zipped the coat around both of them, making certain she was warmer than he was before smiling despite the freezing temperature. Hidden behind one of the stone columns, Naomi Carter quietly watched the children with moist eyes. The beautiful Black Maid, known throughout the estate for her gentle nature, elegant posture, and unwavering kindness, lowered her gaze for a brief moment, as though silently, hoping no one would notice what she had done. But when she finally looked up, her eyes met Adrian's across the courtyard. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. In that silent exchange lasting only a few seconds, Adrian saw no fear, no panic, and no attempt to hide. He saw only quiet acceptance, as though Naomi had already prepared herself to face whatever consequences might follow. Around them, guests continued laughing inside the mansion, completely unaware that outside those magnificent doors, one expensive coat had just become the center of a mystery capable of changing far more than anyone could possibly imagine. Adrian remained perfectly still as the cold wind swept across the front courtyard, his sharp brown eyes fixed on the oversized cashmere coat wrapped around the homeless children. Around him, the music from the ballroom continued as though nothing unusual had happened, yet the quiet scene outside had already captured his full attention. Most people in his position would have reacted immediately, demanding answers before allowing another second to pass. Adrian did not. Years of leading people had taught him that the fastest judgment was often the least accurate one. Without raising his voice, he motioned for his head of security to remain where he was. There would be no confrontation in front of the guests, and certainly no embarrassment for 2 frightened children. He slowly walked toward the gate instead, each measured step reflecting the calm confidence that defined every decision he made. The young boy instinctively stepped in front of the little girl, gently shielding her with the large coat, as though it were the only protection he could offer. Adrian noticed that despite the freezing weather, the child never reached into the coat pockets or examined the expensive fabric with curiosity. Instead, His entire focus remained on making sure the little girl stayed warm. That simple detail quietly challenged the assumptions forming in the minds of anyone who might have witnessed the scene. Before Adrian could speak, Naomi approached from behind at an unhurried pace. Her elegant Black Maid uniform remained immaculate despite the busy evening, and her composed expression revealed neither panic nor desperation. She stood several feet away, respectfully lowering her eyes for a brief moment before meeting Adrian's gaze with quiet honesty. Neither of them needed dramatic words to understand the seriousness of the situation. Adrian asked only one calm question. He wanted to know whether she recognized the coat. Naomi answered with complete honesty. Yes, she recognized it immediately. She also admitted that she was the last member of the household to handle it before it disappeared from the dressing room. The security director shifted uneasily, expecting an immediate order to escort someone away or begin an investigation. Instead, Adrian simply nodded. His attention never left Naomi's face. He had spent years observing people whose words rarely matched their expressions. Naomi showed no sign of deception, no attempt to invent excuses, and no desire to escape responsibility. There was only quiet acceptance, as though she had already decided that protecting someone else mattered more than protecting herself. Inside the mansion, several guests happened to notice the unusual gathering through the enormous glass windows. Whispered conversations spread quickly across the ballroom. Some assumed the children had wandered onto private property. Others speculated that valuable belongings had been stolen. Rumors traveled far faster than facts, yet Adrian refused to allow gossip to become evidence. He turned once more toward the children and noticed the little girl smiling faintly beneath the oversized coat, her trembling gradually fading as warmth returned to her face. The older boy gently thanked Naomi with a grateful glance, but said nothing else, as though he understood that every word carried weight in this unexpected moment. Adrian looked from the children to Naomi one final time before quietly saying that everyone deserved the opportunity to explain the truth before anyone reached a conclusion. Those simple words settled over the courtyard with surprising strength, leaving every person present aware that the real story had only just begun. Ironically, the silence that followed Adrian's decision spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Instead of demanding immediate answers in front of his distinguished guests, he invited Naomi and the two children into a quiet reception room beside the main library, far from the music and the growing whispers inside the ballroom. A fire burned gently in the stone fireplace, filling the room with comforting warmth that slowly replaced the icy chill clinging to the children. A housekeeper quietly served hot chocolate and warm soup without asking unnecessary questions, while Adrian stood near the window with his hands resting calmly behind his back. His expression remained unreadable, but his attention never wandered. He was determined to understand every detail before reaching a conclusion. Naomi thanked the staff with a small nod before kneeling beside the little girl to help remove the oversized coat. The expensive cashmere looked strangely out of place against the child's worn clothing, yet it had clearly fulfilled its purpose. Adrian noticed the girl's cheeks gradually regain their color as she wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Only after making certain the children felt safe did Naomi finally lift her eyes toward Adrian. Her voice remained steady, neither defensive nor emotional. Earlier that morning, before returning to the estate, she had stopped at a neighborhood grocery store to purchase fresh ingredients for the evening gala. As she walked through the parking lot, she noticed the young boy sitting beside a shopping cart, carefully wrapping his own thin jacket around the shoulders of the little girl beside him. Snow had begun falling, and the temperature continued dropping with every passing hour. Naomi approached carefully, offering to buy them a warm meal. The boy politely accepted food for his little sister, but refused money for himself. He explained that accepting kindness did not mean abandoning his dignity. He simply wanted enough strength to keep his sister warm until they could reach the community shelter before nightfall. Those words stayed with Naomi long after she left the parking lot. When she returned to the estate, she could not stop thinking about the children standing in the freezing wind. She remembered the unused coat hanging neatly in Adrian's private dressing room, waiting for another business trip while two children faced the cold with almost nothing. She admitted that she stood outside the room for several minutes, struggling with the decision. She knew the coat belonged to Adrian. She knew she had no permission to remove it. She also knew that every minute she hesitated meant the temperature outside continued to fall. Finally, she chose compassion over certainty. She carefully took the coat, intending to explain everything afterward and personally accept whatever consequences might follow. The young boy immediately interrupted, his face filled with quiet determination. He insisted that Naomi had not forced the coat upon them. In fact, he had tried to refuse because he understood it was valuable. Naomi had simply smiled and told him that warmth was worth more than pride on the coldest day of the year. She asked only one thing in return. When life became kinder to him someday, he should help another person in need without expecting anything back. Adrian listened without interrupting a single sentence. Every word settled into the room with remarkable sincerity. There were no dramatic speeches, no excuses, and no attempt to shift responsibility. There was only a woman who had knowingly risked her position to protect two children she had never met, and a young boy whose gratitude was matched only by his determination to preserve his self-respect. For the first time that evening, Adrian realized he was no longer trying to discover where his expensive coat had gone. He was beginning to understand why someone had believed it belonged somewhere else. The quiet warmth inside the reception room did not erase the tension gathering elsewhere in the mansion. News that Adrian's missing coat had been found on a homeless child spread from whispered conversations to confident assumptions, and before long several distinguished guests politely requested an explanation. Adrian agreed to return to the ballroom, inviting Naomi and the two children to accompany him. He was not interested in protecting appearances at the expense of truth. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the elegant hall as conversations gradually faded into silence. Every pair of eyes followed the unexpected group walking through the entrance. The young boy held his little sister's hand while Naomi walked beside them with calm dignity, never lowering her head despite knowing many people had already judged her. Adrian stood at the front of the room, his steady presence immediately restoring order without the need to raise his voice. One respected business associate quietly remarked that valuable property should never leave a private residence without permission, regardless of the intention. Another guest suggested that compassion and responsibility could not exist separately. Their opinions sounded reasonable on the surface, yet Adrian noticed that none of them had asked the children a single question. Instead of responding immediately, he turned toward the young boy and gently invited him to speak only if he felt comfortable. The boy hesitated for a moment before reaching into one of the coat pockets. Carefully, he removed a small leather card holder and a silver fountain pen. Every face in the ballroom changed at once. Adrian recognized both items immediately. They had belonged inside the coat. All along, the boy stepped forward with both hands extended respectfully and explained that he had discovered them shortly after Naomi gave him the coat. He had wanted to return everything personally because none of it belonged to him. He admitted that he had considered leaving the coat outside the mansion gate to avoid causing trouble, but the little girl had been shivering so badly that he chose to keep her warm until he could find the owner. He apologized for the delay, even though no one had asked him to. Adrian accepted the card holder and fountain pen without taking his eyes off the child. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been damaged. More importantly, nothing about the boy's behavior reflected dishonesty. Naomi quietly added that she had intended to tell Adrian everything after the evening gala ended because she believed the event should not be disrupted by her personal decision. She never expected the children to appear at the front gate while the celebration was still underway. She accepted full responsibility for removing the coat without permission and calmly stated that she would understand whatever consequence Adrian considered appropriate. The ballroom fell completely silent. Several guests who had spoken most confidently only moments earlier exchanged uncomfortable glances. Their certainty had dissolved in the presence of simple honesty. Adrian slowly looked around the room before speaking in the same calm voice that had commanded respect throughout his career. He observed that everyone had been ready to calculate the value of an expensive coat, yet almost no one had paused to measure the value of integrity, compassion, and personal sacrifice. He remarked that wealth made replacing a luxury item possible, but character was far more difficult to find. As those words settled over the room, the atmosphere changed completely. The evening was no longer about a missing possession. It had quietly become a lesson that challenged every person present to reconsider what true value really meant. When the applause finally faded, Adrian invited the children and Naomi into the private family lounge overlooking the snow-covered gardens. The atmosphere felt completely different from the ballroom. There were no curious guests, no whispered opinions, and no pressure to protect anyone's reputation. Only a quiet fireplace, warm light, and the truth that still had more to reveal. Adrian poured 2 glasses of hot cider for the children before taking a seat across from them. His voice remained calm as he asked the young boy what his name was. The boy introduced himself as Ethan and quietly explained that the little girl beside him was his 7-year-old sister, Lily. Since their mother had passed away after a long illness several months earlier, they had been moving between temporary shelters whenever space was available. On nights when every shelter was full, Ethan simply searched for places where the wind was weaker and promised his sister that tomorrow would be better. Adrian listened without interrupting. Ethan never complained about his circumstances. Instead, he spoke proudly about attending public school whenever he could, borrowing library books, and helping Lily practice reading because she dreamed of becoming a teacher one day. Every answer reflected quiet resilience rather than self-pity. Naomi smiled gently as she watched the children speak with surprising optimism despite everything they had endured. Adrian then asked Ethan why he had returned to the estate instead of disappearing with such an expensive coat. The boy lowered his eyes for a brief moment before answering that his mother had always taught him a simple lesson. If kindness was given freely, gratitude should be returned honestly. He explained that when he discovered the leather card holder and silver fountain pen inside the coat, he knew someone would eventually need them. Keeping anything that belonged to another person would only make his difficult life even heavier. Adrian slowly looked down at the fountain pen resting on the coffee table. It had belonged to his own late father and carried sentimental value far beyond its price. For a brief moment, memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit quietly resurfaced. He realized that if Ethan had chosen differently, no one would have blamed a hungry child for keeping such valuable items. Yet the boy had protected them with the same care he gave his little sister. Naomi finally spoke again, admitting that she had recognized the pen inside the pocket before handing over the coat. She had intended to remove it, but became distracted by the urgent need to return to the children before the temperature dropped even further. She accepted responsibility for that mistake without hesitation. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. He understood that compassion sometimes required imperfect decisions made under impossible circumstances. Looking toward the large windows, he watched snow continue falling across the gardens before quietly asking his assistant to contact every nearby community shelter and children's support organization before sunrise. He wanted accurate information about available housing, educational assistance, and long-term resources rather than temporary solutions. Naomi looked at Adrian with quiet surprise, while Ethan gently squeezed his sister's hand, unsure whether to believe that anything in his life was truly about to change. Adrian offered no dramatic promises that evening. Instead, he made one simple commitment. No child willing to protect honesty in the middle of hardship should ever have to face another winter alone if he had the ability to help. In that quiet room, warmed by a single fireplace and filled with ordinary conversation, the meaning of generosity quietly transformed from a seasonal gesture into a lifelong responsibility. The following morning arrived with a sky as clear as polished glass, and for the first time in many years, the Castellano estate felt different. The mansion remained as elegant as ever, but something invisible had shifted within its walls. Adrian began the day not with business reports or financial meetings, but by reviewing information gathered overnight about local family shelters, educational programs, and organizations supporting children without permanent homes. Every document on his desk represented a real life rather than another business opportunity. He read each page carefully, asking thoughtful questions instead of issuing quick instructions. Naomi quietly entered the office carrying fresh coffee and several additional reports prepared by the administrative staff. She expected only to organize paperwork before returning to her regular duties, but Adrian surprised her by inviting her to remain. He thanked her sincerely for telling the truth, even when she believed honesty might cost her position. Naomi answered with the same quiet humility that had guided every decision she made. She explained that kindness without responsibility was incomplete, which was why she had never intended to hide what she had done. Adrian nodded slowly. He admitted that many successful people surrounded themselves with individuals who always protected their own interests first, yet very few possessed the courage to accept responsibility for an act of compassion. Their conversation was interrupted when Ethan and Lily arrived after spending a comfortable night at a nearby family center recommended by the estate staff. The children entered wearing clean winter clothing donated by the shelter, but Ethan carefully carried Adrian's cashmere coat folded neatly over both arms. He smiled politely before returning it, explaining that he wanted its owner to have it back now that Lily no longer needed it. Adrian accepted the coat with genuine appreciation before quietly placing it across the back of a nearby chair instead of putting it away. He told Ethan that the coat had already served its most meaningful purpose. What mattered now was building a future that would never require such desperate choices again. Later that afternoon, Adrian gathered the estate managers, household employees, and several trusted business partners in the conference room. Instead of discussing investments, he announced the creation of a permanent community initiative dedicated to helping children experiencing homelessness receive emergency winter clothing, educational assistance, and stable housing resources. He made it clear that the program would not exist because of charity alone, but because every child deserved the opportunity to preserve dignity while rebuilding hope. To everyone's surprise, Adrian asked Naomi to help shape the program from the beginning. He explained that policies designed only from executive offices often overlooked the realities faced by people in genuine hardship. Naomi accepted with quiet gratitude, emphasizing that every decision should respect the people receiving help rather than treating them as objects of sympathy. The room responded with sincere agreement. As the meeting concluded, Adrian looked once more toward the folded coat resting quietly nearby. Only a day earlier, he had viewed it as a valuable possession that had mysteriously disappeared. Now it had become a reminder that true leadership was measured not by the price of what someone owned, but by the wisdom to recognize when compassion revealed a greater purpose than possession ever could. Several weeks passed, and the initiative Adrian had announced quietly began changing lives in ways that could never be measured by financial reports alone. What started as a single act of compassion gradually became a carefully organized program supported by local schools, community centers, medical volunteers, and businesses that had once gathered at the Castellano estate only for formal events. Every winter coat collected, every scholarship funded, and every family connected with stable housing represented another reminder that meaningful leadership often began with listening instead of commanding. Naomi dedicated herself to the work with the same quiet humility she had always shown inside the mansion. She never sought recognition, and she never reminded anyone how the program had begun. Instead, she focused on greeting every family with respect, learning every child's name, and making certain no one ever felt embarrassed to accept help. Ethan volunteered whenever school allowed, organizing donated books and helping younger children choose warm clothing that actually fit them. Lily's cheerful smile became one of the first things visitors noticed each morning as she welcomed new families with handmade drawings she carefully placed around the community room. Watching the children regain confidence became more rewarding than any celebration Adrian had ever attended. One afternoon, while reviewing the progress of the program, Adrian noticed that Naomi had remained after everyone else left. She was carefully folding donated coats, checking every zipper and button before placing them neatly on the shelves. Curious, Adrian asked why she inspected each coat herself when dozens of volunteers had already helped. Naomi smiled softly before explaining that every child deserved to receive something prepared with care rather than treated as an afterthought. She believed dignity often lived inside the smallest details. A clean coat, a repaired button, or a handwritten welcome note could remind someone that they mattered. Adrian quietly reflected on those words. Throughout his career, he had built companies, negotiated difficult agreements, and managed countless responsibilities, yet he realized that genuine respect could not be purchased or delegated. It had to be demonstrated consistently through everyday choices. Inspired by Naomi's perspective, Adrian expanded the program beyond emergency assistance. New partnerships were established to provide career mentoring, tutoring, counseling, and internships for young adults who had experienced homelessness. Every participant would receive not only temporary support, but also practical opportunities to build an independent future. During the first community celebration held at the estate, many of the same guests who had once questioned Naomi's decision returned. This time they did not arrive to offer opinions. They arrived carrying donations, volunteering their time, and speaking with families whose stories reminded them that circumstances could change far more quickly than anyone expected. Several privately admitted that the experience had transformed their own understanding of generosity. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan approached Adrian holding a framed photograph taken on the snowy night when everything had changed. It showed nothing extravagant, only two children wrapped inside a warm coat beside a woman whose quiet compassion had refused to look away. Adrian accepted the gift with genuine gratitude before placing it in his office instead of another award or business achievement. Whenever visitors later asked about the photograph, he simply answered that it reminded him of the day a single decision revealed the true meaning of responsibility, proving that the strongest foundations were built not by wealth alone, but by ordinary people whose kindness never asked for recognition. By the time spring arrived, the community initiative had grown far beyond anything Adrian had imagined on the quiet winter evening when one unexpected discovery changed the direction of so many lives. What had begun with a single coat now connected schools, businesses, volunteers, counselors, and neighborhood organizations determined to ensure that no child would be forced to choose between dignity and survival. The old reception hall inside the Castellano estate had been transformed into a welcoming community center where families could receive guidance, educational resources, and practical support without feeling judged. Every visitor was greeted by name. Every conversation began with respect, and every decision reflected the values Naomi had quietly encouraged from the very beginning. Ethan adapted quickly to his new school, where his determination impressed both teachers and classmates. His grades steadily improved, and he developed a love for history and literature after spending countless afternoons in the public library that had once served as his only warm refuge. Lily continued chasing her dream of becoming a teacher. Filling notebooks with colorful lesson plans, she proudly shared with anyone willing to listen. Their laughter gradually replaced the uncertainty that had once defined each day, reminding everyone around them that hope often returned one ordinary moment at a time. Naomi never allowed herself to become the center of attention despite the admiration she received from volunteers and community leaders alike. She believed the true purpose of kindness was to lift others rather than elevate oneself. Every morning she arrived early to prepare the center, organize donations, and welcome families with the same gentle smile that had comforted Ethan and Lily on the coldest day of winter. Adrian often watched quietly from a distance, noticing that people naturally trusted Naomi because she listened before offering advice. Her calm presence created an atmosphere where even the most hesitant visitors felt safe enough to share their stories. One afternoon, a young mother entered carrying her frightened son, uncertain whether she deserved assistance after months of hardship. Naomi greeted her exactly as she greeted every guest, inviting her to sit, offering a warm meal, and assuring her that asking for help never diminished a person's worth. Adrian observed the interaction without interrupting, realizing that genuine leadership was not measured only by large decisions, but also by countless acts of quiet respect repeated every single day. Inspired by what he witnessed, Adrian expanded the program once again, establishing scholarships, apprenticeship opportunities, and partnerships with local employers willing to offer meaningful work to families rebuilding their lives. The initiative gradually became known throughout the city not because of the Castellano name, but because people consistently left feeling valued rather than pitted. Months earlier, Adrian had believed he was protecting valuable possessions inside his estate. Now he understood that the greatest investment he could ever make existed outside those walls, in people whose potential had simply needed someone willing to believe in them. As another community gathering came to an end, Ethan looked around the busy hall filled with smiling families and quietly remarked that the building no longer felt like a place where people came because they had nothing. It felt like a place where people discovered they still had a future. Adrian and Naomi exchanged a brief smile across the room, both understanding that the most meaningful transformations rarely happened all at once. They were built patiently through compassion, responsibility, and the simple decision to see another person's humanity before making any judgment. Nearly 1 year after that unforgettable winter evening, the first snowfall of the new season quietly settled over the city once again. The community center was filled with families preparing for the holidays, volunteers arranging winter clothing, and children decorating handmade ornaments that reflected hope instead of hardship. What had once been an empty reception hall inside the Castellano estate had become a place where laughter echoed more often than silence. Adrian walked through the center without security announcing his arrival, greeting volunteers and families by name, something that would have surprised anyone who had known him only through business headlines. Ethan, now taller and noticeably more confident, proudly showed Adrian his latest report card filled with excellent grades. He spoke enthusiastically about joining the school's debate team and his dream of studying law one day, so he could help children who faced the same struggles he had once endured. Lily ran across the room carrying a folder of colorful lesson plans she had created for younger students during weekend reading sessions. Her dream of becoming a teacher had not faded. It had grown stronger with every child she encouraged to believe in themselves. Adrian smiled warmly as he watched the brother and sister who had once stood shivering outside his estate, now helping others with genuine confidence. Across the room, Naomi quietly welcomed another family arriving for the first time. She offered warm drinks, introduced volunteers, and patiently listened before saying anything else. Her kindness remained exactly as it had always been, never seeking recognition and never expecting gratitude. Adrian realized that although the initiative carried his financial support, its true heart had always been Naomi's quiet example. Without her compassion on that freezing morning, none of this would have existed. Before the evening celebration concluded, Adrian gathered everyone together for a simple announcement. Instead of unveiling another expansion or new partnership, he revealed a small glass display placed near the entrance of the community center. Inside rested the carefully preserved cashmere coat that had unknowingly started everything. Beside it stood a modest plaque with a single sentence. It read, "The greatest value of anything we own is the good it allows us to do for someone else." There were no names, no titles, and no mention of wealth. Only the lesson itself remained. Families paused to read the words before continuing inside, many unaware of the remarkable story behind the display. Adrian preferred it that way because he believed inspiration belonged to everyone, not only to those who had lived through the experience. As snowflakes drifted gently beyond the windows, Ethan helped younger children choose warm coats. Lily read holiday stories with joyful enthusiasm, and Naomi quietly folded another stack of donated clothing with the same care she had always shown. Adrian looked around the room and understood that the most meaningful legacy would never be measured by estates, luxury, or influence. It would be remembered in every child who discovered hope instead of despair, every family treated with dignity instead of judgment, and every ordinary person who chose compassion when no one was watching. The expensive coat had returned to its owner long ago, yet its greatest purpose had never been to keep one powerful man warm. It had become the beginning of countless new futures, proving that the smallest act of selfless kindness could quietly change lives for generations to come.